Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chargers Analytics with Arjun. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the importance for the Chargers to have a top 10 offense in 2021 and for pretty much the entirety of Justin Herbert's rookie contract. We're pretty much going to be explaining why having a top 10 offense is necessary to win the Super Bowl, as well as having a top 10 offense is important for stability from year to year, and why the Chargers did a good job of focusing on the offense this offseason rather than trying to build up the defense under a first year head coach who is a defensive minded head coach, right? So in this offseason cycle, I really wanted an offensive head coach to take over, like someone like a Brian Dable, Arthur Smith. I wouldn't have minded either of those two. I had Robert Saleh on my like top three list initially. But that's because I thought he would be bringing the Shanahan system over, which he did. He's bringing it to the Jets with Mike LaFleur, right? And I wouldn't have minded a defensive head coach, but I needed to see that they had an offensive plan in place for Justin Herbert to maintain long-term success, right? So in this video, pretty much is going to be going over why the Chargers having a top 10 offense is necessary for them to, first of all, have a chance of winning the Super Bowl and to maintain long-term success. So let's go to the first thing I want to talk about. Let's just look at, where the Chargers fared in terms of offensive success in 2020. Again, I'm using EPA per play for this to look at, where the Chargers ranked. Again, EPA stands for expected points added, and it is one of the best ways to measure offensive efficiency and success on a per play basis, because it takes into account that not all yards are created equal. And the great thing about EPA per play is it is somewhat stable from year to year. So you want to have a guy like Jameis Winston who throws for 5,000 yards, then goes to being the third string quarterback for the New Orleans Saints the next year. So EPA per play is a great way to measure offensive success. So as you can see, the Chargers ranked in the bottom right quadrant, which means they were above average in passing and way below average in rushing. They ranked 15th out of every team in EPA per play. And, one thing that I would say is encouraging is they were a borderline top 10 offense last year with their rookie quarterback in a shortened offseason with the worst offensive line in the league, right? So we can expect and hope this dropback EPA number to go up. And I think that's really important because in the end, having a passing offense is more important than having a rushing offense, right? If we look at the four teams in the conference championship this year, the Bucks, the Packers, the Bills, and the Chiefs, right? Like pretty much all four of them ranked in the top 5 in terms of dropback EPA, which is measuring passing efficiency, right? So you need to have pretty much a top 5 passing offense to at least reach the conference championship. And that is also something that's stable from year to year, right? So this is the next thing I want to talk about. I put this graph together. It's kind of like a visualization in the sense. So I took a look at every single conference championship team from 2016 to 2020, and I plotted their offensive EPA per play and their defensive EPA per play, right? So the x-axis is offense and the y-axis is defense. So if you look at the graph, every single team from 2016 to 2020 had a top 10 offense, right? The Vikings in 2017 with, I think, Case Keenum, that was a Minneapolis Miracle year. They were the worst offensive team in terms of EPA per play since 2016, and they had a top 10 offense. Every single team that made the conference championship had a top 10 offense, regardless of how bad their defense was, right? Like in 2017, the Patriots had the number 1 offense in the league, and they had the third worst defense in the league. They had the 30th ranked defense in the league per EPA per play allowed. Yet they still made the Super Bowl that year because their offense was good enough to carry them despite how bad their defense was. All right. And somehow Matt Patricia got hired as a head coach the year after the Patriots had the third worst defense in the league. Like, I found that super funny. But, you can see like a lot of the Super Bowl winning teams had an elite offense, right? And it is really important for teams to build their offense first rather than their defense, which is something I think the Chargers did very well this year. So if you want to pause it and look at like every single team and where they fared from the conference championship and where their offense and defense was, go ahead and take a look. I want to point out again, the average offensive rank in terms of EPA per play for every conference championship is right around 4. So you pretty much need a top 4 offense to make the conference championship, right? And that is something that is, number one, stable from year to year, and number two, will allow you to produce in the postseason. And the reason I'm saying that is because defensive efficiency and EPA is something that has a high variance, right? It's very rare that you'll see a defense finish number one in EPA per play allowed in back-to-back years. The Denver Broncos in 2014 and 2015 were one of the only teams to do that, and they had an elite secondary and pass rush with Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware, Chris Harris, Aqib Talib, right? Like they had a lot of those guys stay from year to year. But if you look at a team like the Rams, right, in 2020, they had the number one defense in the league, but they lost John Johnson and they lost Troy Hill. So you can expect to see some defensive regression from year to year. But offense, on the other hand, is stable from year to year, because as long as you have an elite quarterback, like an Aaron Rodgers or a Patrick Mahomes or even a Tom Brady, right, you will expect to see some offensive stability from year to year. Yeah, you might see some regression here and there, but it's not like falling from inside the top 5 to outside the top 15, right? It could be some regression from like ranking 3rd to ranking 8th or 9th. So that is me just explaining a little bit about why having a top 10 offense is necessary. The next thing I want to talk about is, just looking at the Chargers offensive EPA per play for every game in 2020, just, tagging along. So the Bengals didn't have a great game, Tyrod starting that game. Chiefs did pretty well. Justin Herbert's first game ranked, pretty solidly. Panthers, I think they just got tripped up with the pass rush. The offensive line was hurt a lot that game. No Trey Turner, no Brian Bulaga. They did really well against the Bucs and the Saints, and tremendous against the Jaguars. Fell a little bit against the Broncos, did really good against the Raiders. And I think the most important thing to note here is that, Anthony Lynn really got tripped up by 3 of the best defensive minds in 2020, right? Brian Flores, Sean McDermott, and Bill Belichick are 3 defensive head coaches that really put the clamps on this Chargers offense. And the offensive EPA per play, represents that they finished pretty much at the 25 percentile to the bottom, one of the worst offensive performances in the league last year against the Patriots. So what I'm hoping is with Brandon Staley, he understands the type of defenses that defensive masterminds like Brian Flores and Bill Belichick runs. He can identify the disguises, because remember, Keenan Allen literally said, we didn't understand what was going on against the Dolphins game. We weren't prepared for this. So whenever Justin Herbert didn't know what coverage they were in, he just said, okay, I'm just going to hand the ball off up the middle. And I think that was just not the way to go. So hopefully Brandon Staley can change this. And if you want to just finish this out, a really great game against the Raiders and the Chiefs. But if you look at it in hindsight, the Raiders were missing a ton of starters that game, and the Chiefs were resting all the starters. So it's really hard to measure how well the Chargers offense played towards the end of the year. But they were a borderline top 10 offense in terms of passing the ball. And there's a lot to improve on going into next year, but I think they have the ability to be a top 10 offense. The next thing I want to talk about, the Chargers got significantly better along their offensive line. The first step, in my opinion, to going from a borderline top 10 offense to an elite top 10 offense was fixing this offensive line. We've been saying this ever since Phillip Rivers, was on the Chargers and he lost guys like Nick Hardwick. The Chargers have not fielded a good offensive line in years. And I think this is the first year where the head coach and the GM spent significant money and draft capital into this offensive line. I'm just going to explain it. The x-axis is pass block efficiency and the y-axis is run block rate. So we're looking at pass block and run block. And I know PFF grades aren't, the best way to go about this. I just really couldn't find a better way to measure run blocking with data that was like publicly available. So I went with that. And you can see, a lot of the starters that the Chargers have had over the past 3 years finished in this bottom right, bottom left, and bottom right quadrant, which is bad pass blocking, bad run blocking, or bad run blocking and good pass blocking, right? There was no offensive lineman for the Chargers that finished in the top right quadrant, which is good run blocking and good pass blocking. And all 3 of the Chargers' new additions, Corey Linsley, Odi Abushi, and Matt Filer, all ranked in that top right quadrant, right? Like Matt Filer is replacing Forrest Lamp, bottom left quadrant. Odeabushi is replacing Trey Turner, right? He's in this bottom right quadrant, but I mean, if you just look at last year, he would be like all the way over here in this bottom left quadrant, right? And Corey Linsley is replacing Dan Feeney and Mike Pouncey, both who finished below average when it came to run blocking. Pouncey was okay in pass blocking, you can say, but centers don't necessarily have the hardest job when it comes to pass blocking. They have a more important role when it comes to run blocking. And Brian Balaga obviously staying where he's at right tackle. Hopefully we get a healthy season out of him because he is a really good offensive lineman when he's healthy, right? So the Chargers did do a great job improving their offensive line this year. And the way we measure this, right, again, I plotted pass blocking efficiency on the y-axis and pressures allowed on the x-axis. We're looking at a 6-year time frame from 2015 to 2020. The Chargers legitimately had the worst offensive line for the past 6 years. And if anyone wants to tell you that Eli Manning should be in the Hall of Fame over Phillip Rivers, just know that Phillip Rivers had to deal with one of the worst, if not the worst, offensive line period in NFL history, right? So you want to pause and look at where the Chargers are, look at where other teams are, go ahead. I want to point out Saints were the best offensive line during this time period. Raiders were up there as well. Frank Smith coached for both of those teams within the last decade. So hopefully Joe Lombardi and Frank Smith bring over some of that good luck. Same as Sean Surrett, who's the offensive line assistant. And the Steelers had one of the best offensive lines of the past 6 years. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is, what are their expectations? So I did this a while back before the draft, but I took a look at how teams fared when they drafted an offensive lineman versus a wide receiver in the first round and how their EPA per play rose or dropped the following year. So as you can see, the red line represents the line of best fit. It represents the average increase in EPA per play, and the blue line represents the average increase in EPA per play when the team drafted a receiver. So red line is offensive lineman or offensive tackle, and blue line is receiver. So you can see the red line, which is offensive tackle, has a higher, a larger slope, or it's more steeper, right? So the average EPA per play rise is higher for drafting an offensive tackle than it is for drafting a wide receiver in the first round. So that's why, I really preferred an offensive tackle, whether it was Slater, Darisaw, even Elijah Vera Tucker, Tevin Jenkins, whoever it may be. They needed to draft an offensive tackle because the data shows that you have a higher chance of having a better EPA per play and a higher offensive rank the following year, right? So I'm really happy that the Chargers got Rashawn Slater. Everyone should be. And he is, someone that people say is the most polished pass protector in the draft. So we can expect to see some positive EPA per play rise for the Chargers in the 2021 season. And hopefully he finally gives the Chargers a blindside blocker and a protector for Justin Herbert for the next 10, 15 years, hopefully. And again, drafting an offensive tackle gives you a better return on investment than drafting a wide receiver in the first round. So that is going to bring me to the end of today's episode. I hope you learned a little bit about where the Chargers ranked in 2020 and why they need to have a top 10 offense in 2021 and for the future, because offensive success and efficiency in EPA per play is stable from year to year. So don't forget to comment any potential topics you want me to go over in future episodes. And with that, as always, bolts up.